everybody. I'm David with Bolivar Live. Well, last week we were here with Chandra and we talked about Aran and Franklin and everything they provide customers or can provide the customers from the start to the finish of a project. Today we're going to talk about really research. You know, we've talked to Chandra on several occasions on different aspects of home building and design and insurance, but Chandra, you were involved with, and everyone knows Ike down here, whether they were here or not. They know about Ike, and the stories still go on. Watermarks in Galveston, but after a storm comes in, like Ike or Harvey or Ian, you're actually part of a team, and you work with FEMA, if I'm not mistaken, and go in and do research on what worked, what didn't work, so that you guys in FEMA can better design homes. Let's
Right.
talk a little bit about that and your
Yeah.
ties.
So FEMA puts out what's called the Coastal Construction Manual, and it's basically the design manual that you're supposed to use in order to design in these flood-prone areas. So they're not really as much focused on the wind part; they're focused on the flood
On the
part. And
flood.
really, Ike was a tremendous flood. It was a significant wind event, but it was a tremendous flood event, right? We had a horrible storm surge, high wave action, just a lot of devastation when it came to the flooding aspect.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that engineers that design on the coast, they think, oh, I'm just designing for wind. Well, you really have to design for every aspect of that structure that's being impacted on it at the same time. And the biggest other peril that we have right now down here is flood. So we have to
Right.
take that into account. So after Hurricane Ike, we did what's called the Ike mitigation assessment. So they had a team from FEMA that came down and they actually met us at our office, and we had talked to them about some things that we had already seen because we had already been out in the field. We had already started assessing structures, the ones that were left.
Hmm.
And we started assessing structures and looking at failure modes and damage modes and everything. Now, there was a lot of what we call slab claims, which is where the whole thing was gone. That's pretty
Right.
simple. It's just gone. But, and that was a completely flood event. There was no opportunity for wind to hit it because the flood took it out before the wind could even get to it.
Well, and
So,
down here, I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
sure,
Down here, at the time I hit, we still had a lot of homes that were older homes that were
they
built.
were
I can remember you could
50s,
barely walk
60s.
under them, but at the
Yeah.
time, that was built okay,
Yeah, it
or
was
it's
it was
before.
grandfathered in. Yeah, and they had changed,
Right.
every so often, every 10 or 20 years, FEMA will change the flood maps. And so as they figure out what the flooding really looks like, they will change the flood
Hmm.
maps. And so some of these older structures were grandfathered in, but we had 16, 17, 18, 19-foot flood surge in some areas, and the building can't, you can have load hit those piles and kind of reflect off of them, but you can't have water hit the side of a house and not expect that that's going to take it down. It's just too much area that water's hitting and pushing on.
Well, and
So I
it's
mean, just
the waves, and
yeah,
the water may be the wave may be 20 foot, or 15 foot.
exactly.
And when your house is only 10 foot above the ground, you're
It's
going
not
to
going to
have the
make it.
brunt of that wave hitting. And, I don't know very many structures that can handle that.
Right. And that's one of the design criteria in that coastal construction manual. You have to do crashing, a 3-foot crashing, or sorry, a 10-foot crashing wave, debris impact loads from things that are being
Hmm.
projectiled into the house. You have buoyancy, so the house trying to float up off the
Hmm.
foundation, like all these different criteria that you have to design to kind of simultaneously. Oh, plus the wind. Okay, so that's there's
Yeah.
let's just throw that into the cocktail. So that's why you've seen, I would say, after Ike, you've probably seen a little bit deeper depth on your foundations. We saw a lot of scour on foundations. We saw a lot of undermining of those slabs and everything that were kind of helping locking those piles in. But we also have seen maybe a little bit larger pile than we saw. You see 8s and 10s, now you're seeing 10s and 12s. So,
Hmm.
and maybe more of them, because it depends on, there's a lot of things that go into, number of pile. It's part of it's the geometry of the house and of the roof, how tall it is, what the grade elevation is, what the base flood is. So you're putting all those things together to try to make sure, um,
That house has.
what that unique situation is for that house. So every
Mhm.
single house we do uniquely. We don't say, oh, this is just like the neighbors. No, I mean, this house has its own BFE grade, design criteria, everything, and every single one we look at independently. But so we have those relationships with FEMA, and we do those damage assessments. So we did them after Harvey. We did them really more independently after Harvey, and we did them more independently after Hurricane Ian. And we've done a lot of damage assessments. I know I don't look like it, but I put on my boots and my hard hat, and I get out there and I look at everything, and I take a lot of photos, and have a drone, and we fly the drone, and we look at the roofs and how things, if things moved or shifted. So it's really interesting to see like what all that looks like after a storm. I'm not looking to do that anytime soon around here, but I'm glad I can do it other places and still keep that knowledge fresh. And I take my younger engineers out with me because I said there's no way you're ever going to really understand the impact of what you do as a designer unless you see the impacts it has once it's
Right.
tested. So I want them to see the failure modes. I want them to see how it all, really failed, the types of damages that we're seeing, how we can repair those damages, or if we have to replace certain things. So there's no other way to get that kind of experience other than just living it. So
Mhm.
it's really interesting.
There's nothing
Um,
like hands-on,
nothing like it.
you
And
know?
so yeah, it's one of the relationships that we have. Like I said, we have great relationships with FEMA, and actually, I'm on a technical advisory committee for Flash. It's the Federal Alliance for Safer Homes, and so they do resilient building advocacy, and FEMA is one of their other groups that are on the technical advisory committee as well. And so we actually were in Florida last week for their national conference, and we all sat in a room together. And we were talking about, resiliency, design, the impacts of, they were actually talking about the impacts of Hurricane Ian in Florida. And so they do this mitigation assessment after every single one. And this is the first time they've ever really been able to quantify or with a dollar amount, like what the impacts of older structures have on claims. And so it was really interesting to see the damage modes and the damage failures that they assessed, and then what
Mhm.
that dollar amount was associated with it. So, they did the same type of assessment after every storm. They go in after every storm and do this, but this is the first time they actually attached money to it. And it's like all these older structures built after 19 or before 1980, because they didn't have a code in Florida at that
Mhm.
time, were impacted greatly. For the square footage size, I mean, the dollar per square foot was huge.
Yeah.
So they had a lot more damage in these lower lying, less quality built structures than they did in the newer, more elevated, higher quality built structures. So it was really interesting to see that report and see how it tracked. Although, I mean, I could parallels from Hurricane Ike report. It's the same damage failures. It's the same damage, modeling that you
Mhm.
see. It's exactly what we would expect in design. And not every hurricane is going to be the same. Some are going to be more heavily wind, some are going to be more heavily water. There's
Well,
going to be
wasn't
other factors geographically that will affect how they impact that local area. But they all do a lot of the same things, and we have to design them for that worst case scenario because we don't know what storm's going to hit us. It might be another Ike, or it might be something that's just wind only, or something that's even stronger water.
well,
So we have to
wasn't
be prepared.
wasn't Ike like a category 2 but had a storm surge of a category 4 or something?
Yes, and actually I think Hurricane Ike was the reason that they started splitting that Saffir-Simpson scale between water and wind, because before that they called it a category 2, and that was only based on water conditions. But because of the fact that it was so slow moving and it was so large, I mean, when you look at the aerial
It
photographs,
covered
it
the
took up
whole
the entire
Gulf.
Gulf of Mexico. It was huge. And so it was pulling water and surge in from the very edges into that center. And by the time it got there, the force of it was so tremendous that it just pushed a tremendous amount of water into Bolivar Peninsula, and just annihilated the lower lying structures with that storm surge. So that was like a 4 or 5, category as far as storm surge
Storm
goes.
surge.
But as far as wind, I mean, it was a 2, which
Yeah.
is absolutely within our design parameters. But most of the damage that we saw related to wind was just a little siding here, a little roofing there, nothing major. The
It was the
major
water
damages,
damage.
it was the water damages.
And
Exactly.
I can remember when one of the first trip I came back, I want to say it was Lafitte's, one of
Mm-hmm.
those subdivisions in there. It was a newer subdivision, and you had older subdivisions like on both sides of it, and you're driving down the highway, and first you're seeing these cars filled with sand, wondering, but then you come across, and all of a sudden, here's a subdivision that made it.
Right.
But it was because those were newer houses built probably in the last 5 or 6 years, 8 years, versus the homes that were added on and were only 6 foot,
Yeah.
above sea level. And that was the biggest thing, and then on the base side, they didn't have the waves. And so a lot of those homes were okay because they didn't have the water hitting it like they did on the beach. And we were talking about storm surge. I can remember going down 73 towards Port Arthur and barges on Highway 73, because of the
Yeah.
storm surge. And I ran into park warden from one of the parks there by Sabine. And we were talking about the flooding from the event. And he said that they clocked a wave that came on shore and actually ran, from what he told me, up and ended behind Ford Park there
Oh
on
my gosh. Wow.
on I-10, that somehow they were able to clock it or map it,
Track it. Yeah.
track it. But parts of I-10 were flooded,
Yeah.
there in Houston and that. And so, well, like I said at the beginning, it's not just Aran and Franklin, it's the people that make up Aran and Franklin, and Chandra is a big part of that. But it's also the experience and the ties that businesses have that work together, whether it's with FEMA, the insurance people, different nonprofits. But then also, Aran and Franklin takes the time to go in after storms, whether they're doing it with the government or if they're doing it on their own, to educate their engineers and learn from, the storms that we have. And have you seen a difference in the storms versus like the East Coast Florida area versus something that would hit in Texas on how it acts?
I mean, it's actually the failure modes are pretty similar. I
Are
mean,
they?
it's a lot of it is geographically how it hits and where it hits. I mean, if it hits a very populated area, it's going to have more
Have more
impact than
to.
it hits a less populated area. Like where it hit last year, it kind of hit in the Port Charlotte area. So that is right near Cape Coral, Fort Myers, like
Hmm.
that's Hurricane Ian that hit Florida. Well, that area has a lot of inland canals, and so it pushed a lot of water
Water.
inland that they were not expecting, because the storm surge for that one, just it pushed a lot of water inland, and they had a lot of rain, kind of like Harvey. So
Hmm.
it was a multi-day event also. So it was very impactful also. And again, the winds were really high. So it was a high wind event also. So I mean, like every roof was gone. So, and there was a lot of tile roofs, which we don't have as many tile roofs here.
Hmm.
But tile roofs are really funny. If they're put on correctly, they're amazing. They perform well. But if they're not put on well, those adhesives come off. The nails break. They crack the tiles if they're a
Hmm.
nail on installation. So, a lot of those tile roofs had failure modes. And there's several tile roofs that I looked at that the whole middle of it was destroyed or loose, and I was like, there's no way to repair that without taking the whole roof off. They were like, oh, we're going
Hmm.
to give them 50% on the insurance. I was like, there's no way you can, because you can't put it back on
Right.
50%. You've got to take the whole thing off to be able to put it back on. So we've been able to help people work with their insurance companies to be another engineering opinion for, failures. A lot of people, when we do damage assessments, they just want to know, is it safe to even go back in their house? They don't know, they don't know what's really structural damage or what's more cosmetic. And so we can kind of help them say, okay, hey, I know your ceiling fell in, but it's really cosmetic. Structurally, everything's okay, or everything's okay, but hey, shore up this one area, let's fix that, and then the rest of it's fine. So we can kind of help them, assess what things they need to do immediately to kind of preserve and
Right.
protect their property and themselves, so that they can get back in their house. Because that's the goal, right? I mean, everybody wants to get back in their house as soon as
As
possible.
fast as possible.
And ideally, we'd be building to where you don't have those losses, and we're keeping the roof on, and we're keeping the water out, and we're not having those damage failure modes. That's the long-term goal. But if we're not there yet. Let's make sure that when we rebuild back that we get there. So
Yeah.
that's the next phase.
Great, great. Well, if you want some more information maybe on things that they've seen or how they can help you build the perfect house to the best of the abilities for what we have down here, please go to their website, aranfranklin.com. You can get a lot of information. You can get information on the fortification home, and that's a whole nother show. We'll probably do another one of those here in the next month or so. But talk to them and let them know what you're looking for, or maybe a problem you have, and let an engineer look at it and solve it so that you have the least amount of damage possible when we do get another storm. So, Chandra, thanks for joining us this morning. We'll be back next week with another show with Aran and Franklin. Until next time, I'm David with Bolivar Live. Y'all have a great day, great week. Come see us. God bless, and bye-bye.